The fire had been laid too small on purpose, and she read on without letting her fingers shake. In the long drawing room at Corbridge Hall, a young woman in dove gray held a book of dry sermons toward the failing light. Miss Rowan Ashe was a lady's companion, hired to be furniture that could be made to speak. The Dowager Duchess of Corbridge sat straight as a fire-iron ivory cane across her knees and called her a shopgirl to her face. When Sir Rowland Hargrave arrived, red-jowled and heavy with rings, the two of them laughed over the ruin of a family named Fenwick, and Rowan poured the tea and said nothing. Against her breast she kept an old letter from her father, folded thin from reading. Then the Duke came home. Julian Marbury, master of the ducal estate, cold and exact, a gold signet on his hand. She rose to serve him at the formal table and lifted her eyes for a single instant, and the Duke went still. He knew those eyes. Violet touched with gold, the left one flecked bright. He had been hunting for that face for 3 years, since a night on the Dover road he had told no one about. He did not leave the next morning. He stayed, and he watched her, and something neither of them would name began to turn between them. Before the story begins, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, dignity, and love that arrives against all odds move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The winter of 1818 had frozen the fountains at Corbridge Hall, and in the long drawing room, a young woman in dove gray read aloud while her fingers went slowly numb. The fire had been laid too small on purpose. Miss Rowan Ashe knew this, the way she knew everything in this house now, without being told. She held the book higher, tilted the page toward the meager light, and did not falter over a single word. Across the room, propped like a monument in her chair of carved oak, the Dowager Duchess of Corbridge listened with her eyes closed and her ivory-handled cane laid across her knees. Augusta Marbury was thin, white-haired, straight as a fire-iron, and she had the gift of making silence feel like judgment. "Louder," she said, without opening her eyes. "You mumble like a shop-girl." Rowan raised her voice by a careful degree. The cameo at the old woman's throat rose and fell. The book was a volume of sermons, dry as chalk, and Rowan had read this same passage 3 evenings running. She suspected the Duchess did not care for the words at all. She cared that someone should sit and produce them on command. A companion was furniture that could be made to speak. Rowan had understood the terms the day she took the post, and she had taken it anyway, because a girl with no name left to spend must spend the one she borrows. "Your father," Augusta said suddenly, "was a clergyman?" The needle of the question went in clean. Rowan set her thumb between the pages. "A tutor, Your Grace, in the north." "Dead?" "Some years now." The old woman's mouth thinned. "It shows. There is a want of polish in you that no dead tutor mended." She lifted one veined hand and turned it, examining her own rings. "Still, you do not chatter. That is the whole of a companion's art, girl, to be present and to be quiet. Most fail at the second." "Yes, Your Grace." "Go on." Rowan opened the book and went on. She had grown skilled at this, at letting her voice do the work while the rest of her stood somewhere far off, untouched. It was the only wealth she had left, that inner room no one had learned to enter. She kept the door shut and she kept reading. Outside the sealed windows, the sky had gone the color of pewter. Snow had begun in the afternoon and had not stopped. Somewhere below in the great cold house, a clock struck the half-hour, and the sound traveled up through the floors like something drowning. A footman came to the door. "Sir Rowland Hargrave, Your Grace." Augusta's eyes opened. Something in her face rearranged itself into welcome, and Rowan watched it happen with the private attention of a person who has learned that faces are the most useful thing to read. "Show him up and bring the good candles, not these stubs." The Duchess turned her head a fraction. "You, stay. Pour when he wishes it, and otherwise be a chair." Rowan closed the book and rose and moved to the small table where the tea things waited. She was good at becoming a chair. She folded her hands and lowered her eyes and let the room forget her, which it did at once, because Sir Rowland Hargrave had come in filling the doorway with brown broadcloth and the smell of wet wool and cologne. He was a heavy man of perhaps 50, red about the jowls, his side whiskers going gray, his waistcoat a riot of brocade strained across his middle. Too many rings, a watch chain thick enough to moor a boat. He crossed the room with his hand already out, and bent low over the Duchess's fingers. "Augusta, you look 10 years my junior, as always. And you lie as fluently as ever. Roland, sit. The fire is poor. I economize on companions and candles both." He laughed too loudly and dropped into the chair opposite, and the chair complained. His small eyes went once around the room, over the shrouded portraits, the good silver, the girl by the tea table, and moved on, having priced everything and dismissed the least of it. Rowan felt the pass of his glance the way one feels a draft. "Tea," Augusta said, and Rowan poured. She carried the cup on its saucer with steady hands and set it at Hargrave's elbow, and he did not look up, and she stepped back into the shadow between the window and the wall where the light did not reach. This was correct. This was the whole of the art. The two of them fell to talking as if she had ceased to exist, which suited her, and for a while it was only the small country business of the county, a living to be filled, a bridge washed out, a marriage that had gone off. Rowan let it wash past her. She was thinking of the letter. It lived where it always lived, folded small against her stays, over her heart, worn soft as cloth at the creases. She had not read it in months. She did not need to. She knew the hand, the long looping capitals, the ink gone brown, and she knew the last line by heart, and on the worst evenings she pressed her forearm flat against her chest so that she could feel the little stiffness of the paper beneath the wool and know it was still there. It was there now. She pressed. "The Fenwick business?" Hargrave was saying, and the name went through her like cold water. Her hand, which had risen halfway to the letter, stopped. "Oh, that." Augusta made a sound between a laugh and a cough. "I had near forgotten it. The baronet. Fenwick of, where was it? Marrowby, in the west." Hargrave settled deeper, warming to it, the way a man warms to a story he has told before and profited by. Sir Henry Fenwick, old family, older debts. It came out that he had been dipping into monies that were not his. Trust funds, widow's portions. A great deal of it, and all of it gone. How vulgar. Vulgar and stupid both. He was caught, of course. There was a paper, his own signature on the transfers, plain as day. He hadn't the wit to hide it. Hargrave took a swallow of tea. The shame of it killed him inside the year, they say. The estate went under the hammer. The whole line finished. There was a girl, I believe. But she, he waved a Berington hand, vanished. Went into service, or into the river, one or the other. No loss to anyone. Rowan stood very still in her corner. She had become expert at stillness. It was the one thing this house had truly taught her, and she practiced it now with everything she had. The level breath, the loose hands, the eyes fixed on the middle distance as though she heard nothing at all. Inside the shut room of herself, something was screaming, and she did not let a hair of it reach her face. He hadn't the wit to hide it. Her father, who could not add a column of figures twice and get the same answer, who wept over Virgil and forgot to eat. Her father, whose signature had appeared on papers he had never in his life seen. "A pity for the girl," Augusta said, in the tone of one remarking on weather. "Whatever became of her, she carries the name of a thief. No man of sense would touch her. None." Hargrave smiled his oiled smile. "The name is finished." "I made certain of that." The last words were softer, almost swallowed in the cup, and Augusta was already turning the subject, and perhaps she did not catch them at all. But Rowan caught them. They dropped into the silence of her corner and lay there, gleaming. "I made certain of that." She looked at Sir Roland Hargrave then, one long look, from the safe dark, while both of them had forgotten her, and she saw the rings, and the strained brocade, and the small satisfied eyes, and she understood that she was looking at the shape of the thing that had eaten her family. She had wondered, these 3 years, whether such a shape existed, or whether ruin had simply fallen on them out of a clear sky, the way it falls on the deserving and the innocent alike. Now she knew. It had a face. It was drinking her employer's tea. She did not move. She poured again when the Duchess lifted a finger. Her fingers were perfectly steady on the porcelain. Later she would remember that with a grim kind of triumph, that she had served fresh tea to the man who had killed her father, and spilled not a drop. Hargrave stretched, and his gaze drifted idly across the room, and this time it caught on her, the girl in gray by the tea table, and held a beat longer than furniture warrants. Rowan lowered her eyes to the carpet. She had learned that too. A servant who meets a gentleman's look invites him to remember her, and she wished above all things to be forgotten. "You keep a quiet mouse there, Augusta," he said, tipping his head toward the corner, without troubling to lower his voice. "Pretty enough under the drab. Where did you find her?" "An agency in Bath sent her." Augusta did not glance round. She reads passively, and knows when to be silent, which is more than the last three managed. "Leave her be, Roland. I cannot afford to have my companions frightened off. The good ones are dear, and the cheap ones steal. I only observe that she is wasted on sermons." He chuckled, and turned his rings toward the candlelight, and lost interest, as a man loses interest in a picture he has decided not to buy. "Though I suppose a girl with no people and no portion may thank God for the sermons and the roof both. She may indeed." Rowan stood in her corner and let the words go through her and out the other side. No people, no portion. He was not wrong. That was the worst of it, that everything the man said of her was, in the letter of it, true. She had no people. She had no portion. She had a false name from a Bath agency that had never heard of Aurelia Fenwick, and a gray dress, and a black velvet ribbon at her throat that she wore because it was the last thing her mother had owned, and a folded letter over her heart. She thought of that letter now, deliberately, the way one presses a bruise to be sure it is still there. Her father had written it in the last spring of his life, before the officers came, when he still believed the thing could be explained and set right. "My Aurelia." It began, in the looping hand that had taught her to read. It said that whatever came, she was to hold her head up, that a name was not a coat to be stained by another's mud, that the truth was patient and would keep. It ended, "I have done nothing that you need be ashamed to own." She had believed him when he wrote it. She had gone on believing him, alone, through 3 years in other people's cold houses, while the whole of England believed the paper with his forged signature instead. Now she knew whose hand had guided that forgery. It was sipping tea and calling her a quiet mouse. She poured him another cup when he raised a finger, and she was proud, in her bleak private way, that her hand did not shake. "You will stay to dine, Roland," Augusta said. It was not a question. "I had hoped to be asked. The roads are the devil, and your table," he pressed a hand to his heart, mockingly, "is the only civilized thing this side of Shrewsbury. It is the only civilized thing in Shropshire, and you may say so." The old woman rapped her cane once on the floor, pleased. "Besides, you may be of use. My son is expected." Something changed in the room, though nothing visible moved. Hargrave set down his cup. "Corbridge, here?" "Here. Tonight, if the snow permits, tomorrow if it does not." Augusta's fingers tightened on the ivory head of the cane. "He has been at Corbridge scarcely 3 weeks in 3 years, Roland. He goes from his townhouse to his hunting box to God knows where, restless as a dog off the leash. He has buried himself in Parliament and in that endless business of his, and he will not sit still long enough to do the one thing he owes this family." "Which is?" "To marry." She said it like a sentence pronounced. "He is 36. There is no heir. When he breaks his neck on some road at midnight, and he rides like a man who wants to, the whole of it goes sideways to a cousin I would not trust to mind a cat." Her mouth worked. "I have arranged matters. There is a lady, suitable in every particular, fortune, blood, connection. It wants only that the two of them be put in a room and the thing concluded." Hargrave's small eyes had gone very bright. "And the lady's people are amenable," Augusta said, "which is all that need concern you. You have a hand in such arrangements, Roland. You have a talent for them. I may want your help before the season is out. You have only to ask." He inclined his head, and beneath the courtesy, Rowan saw something pass between the two old plotters, some understanding, some coin already counted. "It would be my particular pleasure to see Corbridge settled." She stood in her corner and listened to them dispose of a man's life over cooling tea, and she thought, so there is a lady, and there is a bargain, and there is money moving somewhere underneath it that neither of them will name aloud. She filed it away. She had learned to file things away. A companion hears everything, because no one troubles to be careful in front of a chair. The talk moved on to the dinner, and the wine to be brought up, and whether the blue rooms were aired for his grace, and Rowan poured and stood and poured. The snow thickened at the window until the glass showed nothing but a churning gray. The candles the footman had brought guttered and steadied, and somewhere out in that whiteness, she understood, a man was riding toward this house, the son, the Duke, the great restless prize that these two were so busy trading, and she felt not the smallest flicker of interest in him. Dukes were weather. They happened to people like her. One did not look up at them any more than one looked up at rain. Girl, Augusta's voice cut across her thoughts. The letter. For one plunging instant, Rowan thought she meant the letter, the one over her heart, and the blood left her face. Then she saw the Duchess gesturing at the writing desk. His Grace's letter, on the salver. Bring it, my eyes are done for the night. You shall read me what hour to expect him. Rowan crossed the room, took up the folded paper from the silver tray, and broke nothing. The seal was already broken, and unfolded it, and read aloud in her level companion's voice the few cold lines in which the Duke of Corbridge informed his mother that he would arrive Thursday, that he would stay a fortnight, that she was not to trouble herself. No warmth in it, no word wasted. A hand that wrote as if writing cost money. A fortnight. Augusta's brows rose. A fortnight. He has not given me a fortnight since his father died. She looked for a moment almost uncertain, an old woman surprised by her own son, and then the look was gone, and the granite was back. Well, we shall make use of it. Roland, you will help me contrive to keep him here past his patience. And you, the cane swung toward Rowan, you will make yourself scarce and useful, in that order. His Grace does not care to be reminded that his mother requires nursing. When he is in a room, you are not. Do you understand me? Perfectly, Your Grace. Good. Augusta settled back, satisfied to have arranged the world to her liking. Now finish the sermon. We were at the part about the wages of pride. Rowan returned to her chair, took up the volume of sermons, found the place. The fire had sunk to embers, and no one had ordered it fed. Her breath, had the light been better, would have shone faintly on the air. She read on about the wages of pride, while Sir Roland Hargrave dozed with his rings folded on his brocade belly, and the man who had forged her father into a felon slept the sleep of the untroubled not 8 feet from the daughter he had orphaned, and neither of them knew her name. That, she thought, turning a page, was the whole of it. Neither of them knew her name. They had buried Aurelia Fenwick along with her father, buried her so thoroughly that they could sit in the same room with her and feel nothing but the small comfort of a fire, economically small. It was the safest hiding place in England, the inside of their contempt. No one searches the furniture. She pressed her arm once against her chest, felt the little stiffness of the letter answer, and read on. 40 miles to the east, in the last gray hour before that same snow, the Duke of Corbridge was doing what his mother most feared, riding like a man with somewhere to fall. Julian Marbury had sent his carriage ahead with his valet and his boxes, and had taken the horse himself, against all counsel, because the carriage moved at the pace of grief, and he could not abide it. He rode the way he did everything now, hard and forward, and without much caring where the road went, so long as it went. The cold worked into the old scar along his left flank and set a stiffness in him when he rose in the stirrups, and he ignored it, as he ignored most things his body reported. He was a tall man, dark, with a jaw like the corner of a building, and eyes the pale gray of ice over deep water. He had a face that people called handsome when they wanted something, and hard when they did not, and the mouth of a man who had long ago stopped expecting to be pleased. There was a single thread of gray at his temple that he had earned all at once, 3 years past, on a road much like this one. That was the thing he did not speak of, and thought of daily. 3 years past, on the Dover road, in a night of rain, his carriage had gone into a ditch with a broken axle and a bolting team, and he had been thrown, and he had lain in the mud of a stranger's field, with a broken thing grinding in his side, and the certain knowledge that he was going to die there, unattended, in the dark, as anonymous as any drover. He remembered the cold coming up through his back. He remembered thinking, with a kind of contempt for himself, that it was a foolish way for the Duke of Corbridge to end, face down, unwitnessed, worth nothing to anyone but his creditors. And then there had been a light, and a girl. He remembered very little of her and forgot none of it, which was the particular cruelty of the thing. A young woman with a lantern, come out of the storm from some cottage or barn, who had knelt in the mud beside a bleeding stranger and not run. She had bound his side with a strip torn from her own petticoat. She had got him, he never afterward understood how, a slight thing like that, and a man of his size, into the dry of a barn, and packed straw against his cold, and stayed, talking to him through the worst of the night, in a low, steady voice, so that he would not slide down into the dark. He had drifted and surfaced and drifted. He had not learned her name. He had asked it, he thought, and she had said something, and he had lost it. But he had seen her eyes. Once, near dawn, the lantern between them, he had looked up into her face and seen her eyes, and those he had not lost. They were a color he had no word for, a smoke, a violet, a dusk, and the left one alone, was scattered through with flecks of gold, as though someone had spilt a little coin into it. He had looked at that gold in that gray and thought, before he went under again, "There, that is the last thing. That is not a bad last thing to see." He had not died. His people had found him at first light, and the girl was gone. Gone before dawn, no name, no direction, nothing left but a torn petticoat knotted round his ribs and a barn with the print of her in the straw. He had made inquiries. He had made a great many inquiries, quietly, for 3 years, in a manner that had cost him more than he would admit, and yielded exactly nothing. A girl with a lantern on the Dover road, violet eyes, gold in the left. It was not enough. It was everything, and it was not enough. He had come to think of her as a debt. Julian Marbury did not care to owe. He owed no man a shilling, arranged his affairs so that he never should, and he could not bear that the single largest debt of his life itself, was owed to a shadow he could not find to repay. It sat in him like the scar sat in him, quiet and permanent and aching in the cold. So he did not sit still. He rode the roads at midnight. He looked, without letting himself know he was looking, into the faces of every young woman he passed, in doorways, in shops, at the edges of other men's ballrooms, for a smoke in gold that was never there. His mother thought him restless from want of a wife. He let her think it. It was simpler than the truth, and the truth was not hers to hold. What he did not tell her, what he told no one, was that he had stopped believing he would find the girl at all, and had begun to be afraid of the man he would be once he finally gave up looking. The snow found him 10 miles from Corbridge and came down in earnest, and he put his head into it and rode on. The great pile of the hall rose at last out of the white, his mother's economy shining in exactly 2 lit windows against all that dark stone, and he felt the usual thing he felt at the sight of it, which was no gladness at all, only the dull pull of duty and the certainty that within an hour his mother would begin, over the soup, to marry him off to somebody suitable. He gave the horse to a boy in the frozen yard and stood a moment in the falling snow looking up at the house that was his, and had never once felt so. A fortnight. He had promised her a fortnight, and already regretted it. He would sit through the dinners. He would let her parade her suitable lady. He would be gone the instant honor allowed. He did not know, no man knows the hour his life turns, that behind one of those 2 lit windows a young woman in dove gray was reading sermons aloud to keep herself warm, and that folded over her heart was a letter, and that in her face, if he could only be got to look at it, was the smoke and the gold he had crossed 3 years of England to find. He went up the steps and into the cold hall, shaking the snow from his shoulders, and somewhere above him a clock began to strike the hour that everything had been waiting for. The doors of the drawing-room opened before the last stroke had faded, and Julian Marbury came through them still smelling of snow. Augusta rose in a rustle of silver-gray silk. The ivory cane took her weight, then forgot it. She crossed the room quicker than her 60 years should have allowed, and offered her son both hands. He took one. He kissed the cold ring on it and said nothing warmer than her name. "Corbridge," she said, tasting the title as though it belonged more to her than to him. "You are early. The roads west of Ludlow are already closing. I chose the ditch I knew." Hargrave heaved himself up from the good chair by the fire, the watch chain across his brocade waistcoat catching what little light the grate allowed. He came forward with his hand out and his smile already arranged. "Your Grace, what a very great pleasure." Julian looked at the hand a moment before he took it. Hargrave. "Sir Roland has been keeping me company through a tedious season," Augusta said. "He has views on the drainage of the eastern fields that I think you will want to hear." "I am certain I will not," Julian said, and moved past both of them to stand nearer the fire, holding his palms toward a blaze that gave almost nothing back. In the dark corner past the pianoforte, Rowan stood over the tea-things and kept her head down. She had heard the clock strike. She had heard the doors. She had counted the footsteps across the boards and known from their length that the man they belonged to was tall, and she had made of herself exactly what Augusta had commanded that afternoon: a chair, a shadow, a thing that poured. Her hands moved among the cups without her. The urn breathed a thin steam. She kept her chin low and her eyes on the amber running into the china, and she was, to every person in that room, nobody at all, which was the whole of her intention. "You will sit with us at dinner, and in the spring you will go about your marrying," Augusta was saying, though she said it the way she said everything, as if the future were a thing she had already ordered and merely awaited. "Lady Seraphina Vane and her mother come to us within the fortnight. You will find her much improved since Almack's." "I found her perfectly finished at Almack's," Julian said. "It was the finishing I objected to." Hargrave laughed. A wet, comfortable sound. "A man of your position cannot object forever, Your Grace. Blood wants blood, land wants an heir. And Lady Seraphina's people have debts your money would answer." Julian said it without heat, still watching the fire. "Yes, I have read the same ledgers you have, Sir Roland. I only wonder that you read mine." The room cooled a degree that had nothing to do with the grate. Hargrave's smile held, because it was painted on, but the small calculating eyes above it went flat and busy. "Corbridge," Augusta said, in the tone that had ended arguments in this house for 40 years. "You are tired and unkind. Ring for dinner." Julian turned from the fire, and because he turned, and because the bell pull hung on the wall beside the tea table, his eye passed for the first time across the corner where the companion stood. He saw a gray dress, a plain woman in a plain dress, pouring tea, the sort of furniture a great house accumulates and stops noticing. His gaze went over her and on toward the bell as a hand goes over a familiar banister in the dark. Then it came back. He could not have said why. Later he would try, and fail, and settle only on this, that something in the set of her shoulders was too still. Servants who wish to be invisible fidget. They polish, they hover, they perform their smallness. This woman held herself the way he had once seen a soldier hold himself under fire. Quiet, present, spending every particle of her strength on not being seen. "Girl," Augusta said, "the Duke will take his tea now. Bring it." Rowan set the cup on its saucer. She lifted it. She crossed the room to where he stood, her eyes low as they had been low all evening. 23 years of a name she could not use folded small inside her chest, under a letter no one knew she carried. She stopped before him. She raised the cup a little in offering. And because a servant offering tea must, for 1/2 second, find the hands that will take it, she looked up. The fire was at his back and full on her face. Her eyes came up out of shadow into the light of it, and they were violet, smoke and violet, wide and clear, and in the left one, riding the iris like a coin dropped in dark water, a single splash of gold. Julian Marbury held the cup untaken. For a moment he made no movement a watcher would have named, but everything in him stopped at once, the way a great clock stops when a hand is thrust into its works, the breath halfway drawn, the arm halfway lifted. The whole machine of him seized on one image 3 years old, and never once, in all that time, laid down. A lantern swinging in the rain, a voice telling him to be still, to be still. She had him, cloth torn and pressed hard against his side, and above the pain and the cold and the certainty of dying, 2 eyes looking down into his, one of them marked with gold, as though someone had spilled the last of the daylight into it before the world went out. He had hunted those eyes across 3 years and 4 counties. He had described them to men who thought him mad. He had ridden into ditches he half hoped to be pulled from, and here they were, in his mother's drawing room, over a cup of cooling tea, in the face of a companion hired out of an agency in Bath. The saucer trembled once in Rowan's hand. She had felt it, the moment his stillness changed its nature, the moment a great man ceased to be bored and became, all at once, terribly awake. She had no notion why. She knew only, with the animal certainty of the hunted, that she had been seen, and that being seen was the one thing she could not afford. She lowered her eyes again, too late, and she knew it. "Your tea, Your Grace," she said. Her voice was low and even, and it cost her everything she had. Julian took the cup. His fingers were steady. He made them steady. But he took it without a glance at it, and his eyes stayed on the crown of her bowed head as if he might read, through the severe dark coil of her hair, The answer to a question he had carried so long he had stopped expecting the world to hold it. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, but he said them slowly, and he said them to her, and in that house no one thanked the furniture. Augusta marked it. Augusta marked everything that happened in her drawing room. It was the source of her power and the whole of her entertainment. Her gray eyes moved from her son to the gray back of the retreating companion, and a small line drew itself between her brows. "Rowan," she said sharply, "go and see. They have not ruined the fish. Corbridge, sit. You are behaving like a man who has seen a ghost, and it is very tiresome in one's own son." "Am I?" Julian sat. He set the untasted tea on the table at his elbow. "Forgive me. The cold, I think." But his gaze followed the woman to the door, and stayed on the door after it had shut. Rowan reached the passage and put her back against the cold plaster and breathed. She had trained herself out of trembling. In 3 years of other people's houses, she had unlearned every gesture that might mark her as anything but a servant born. The straight spine of a baronet's daughter, the way her mother had taught her to enter a room as though it were glad of her. She had made herself small on purpose, hour by hour, until smallness fit like a glove. And in 1/2 second, over a cup of tea, a stranger had looked at her and the whole costume had slipped. She did not know him. She was certain she did not know him. A duke. She had never in her life stood in a room with a duke until this night. And yet the way he had looked at her was not the way men looked at a plain companion, nor even the way they sometimes looked at a pretty one. He had looked at her as a man looks at a face he has been searching for, as though she were the end of something. Down the passage, the kitchen was a red uproar of heat and shouting. She went toward it because she had been sent, and because motion was better than the plaster wall, and because whatever had happened in that room, the fish would still be spoiled if no one saw to it. In the drawing room, Julian let his mother talk. She talked of the Vanes, of the fortune and the failing estate behind it, of the excellent sense a marriage there would show, and the excellent settlement Hargrave had all but drawn up. Julian answered, when a silence grew too long to leave, and heard perhaps 1/10 of it. The other 9 parts of him were in the passage, on the stair, in Bath, on the Dover road in the rain. Agencies kept records. A woman did not appear out of nothing with a plain name and a plain dress. She came from somewhere. Someone had recommended her. There were letters. There were dates. He thought of the letters he would write. He thought of the questions he could not ask aloud in this room, over this fire, before this man with too many rings. For he had seen, in the 1/2 second before her eyes fell, the thing under her stillness. Not surprise, fear. She had looked at him and been afraid, not of a duke's displeasure which servants wore lightly as a uniform, but of something particular and large. She was hiding. He had spent 3 years being the one who searched. Not once had it occurred to him that the woman he searched for might be, all that while, a woman who did not wish to be found. "You are not attending to me," Augusta said. "I am attending to you perfectly. You wish me to marry Lady Seraphina Vane, whom I dislike, for money I do not need, to please Sir Rowland, whom I trust rather less than the weather." Hargrave set down his glass. "Your Grace does me an injustice." "I hope so," Julian said pleasantly. "I should be sorry to be right." Augusta struck the floor once with the ivory cane, a full stop in bone. "Dinner," she said, "both of you, before I lose what remains of my patience and my appetite together." They went in to dinner. The dining room ran longer than it was warm, hung with dead marburies and dim gilt frames. The table dressed for 4, and lit down its center with candles that leaned in the draught from the shuttered windows. Augusta took the head. Hargrave sat at her right, near the light and the wine. Julian sat across from him, and the 4th place, laid at the foot in a nod to the numbers rather than to any sense that the companion was a guest, waited empty until Rowan came. She came in quietly and sat where she was placed, at the far end, below the candles, in the border country between the family and the dark. She kept her eyes on her plate. She had learned that a companion who wished to survive a formal dinner ate little, said nothing, and agreed with the last person to speak. But she could feel him, down the length of the table, past the candle flames leaning and the soup going cold in Hargrave's spoon, while Hargrave talked. She could feel the Duke's attention resting on her like a window opened at her back. She kept from confirming it. She had no need. Julian ate almost nothing. He watched her hands, because her face was turned down and her hands were all she would give him, and her hands undid her. They lay wrong against the coarse napkin. They knew the weight of good silver and the order of a laid table too well. They moved among the glasses without hunting for the right one, the way only a woman raised to such tables moves. A companion from a bath agency, daughter of a dead northern tutor, would fumble. This one made no false reach. This one had merely, at some point, resolved to stop being the girl who never fumbled. And the Fenwick matter, Hargrave was saying, warm with wine, is the very example I mean, Duchess. A man is only as safe as his name, and a name is a fragile thing. One forged line in a ledger, and a baronet of 400 years is in his grave inside the 12-month. At the foot of the table, a fork stopped against a plate. Only for a moment. Then it went on. Julian saw it. He had been watching for exactly such a thing without knowing that he watched, and he saw the small hitch travel through her, saw her master it, saw her lay the fork down with great care, as though it had grown suddenly heavy. You take a warm interest in the Fenwicks, Sir Rowland, Julian said, for a family so thoroughly finished. An interest in justice, your grace, nothing more. The man was a thief. The law found him so. The law finds many things, Julian said. It depends who brings the law its dinner. Hargrave's color rose above the gray whiskers. Augusta, who liked her son's cruelty best when it was aimed away from herself, allowed a thin smile into her wine. Rowan sat at the foot of the table with her father's letter warm against her breastbone and every muscle in her body arranged to betray nothing, and thought, he knows something. Not who I am. He cannot know who I am. But the Duke had turned Hargrave's own story back on him like a reversed blade, had said, depends who brings the law its dinner, as if he had heard, from some other room in his life, the very thing she had heard through the drawing-room door not 2 hours since. Words she would carry to her grave. I made certain of that. She held her eyes on the plate. She had made a discipline of it, but under the plain gray bodice her heart went hard and quick, because for 3 years she had carried the truth alone, a stone swallowed whole, and now 2 men sat at this table who each held a piece of it and did not know the other held anything at all. The dinner wore on. The candles burned down a finger. Augusta returned, as she always returned, to the Vanes, to the fortnight, to the ball she meant to give when the frost broke and the county could be made to travel. A ball, she said, at which certain matters might be settled before certain other people changed their minds. Hargrave agreed with everything. Julian agreed with nothing, and watched the foot of the table. Once, only once, Rowan forgot herself. Hargrave, expansive with the third glass, made some remark upon the folly of the fallen gentry, the daughters especially, who could not be brought to understand that they were servants now and must leave off their airs. And he laughed and looked down the table as if to fold the quiet companion into the joke against her own kind. Rowan lifted her head to meet it. It was nothing. A servant may look at a guest who addresses the whole table, but she lifted her head into the candlelight and her chin came up with it, and for the length of one breath she was not a companion at all. She was Aurelia Fenwick of Marrowby, whose father had taught her that a Fenwick met an insult with her eyes level, and the whole proud carriage of the girl she had buried showed through the gray dress like a lamp through a curtain. Julian saw it. He set down his glass without a sound. Then she remembered where she was and who she was pretending to be, and the light went out of her, and she was furniture again, studying her plate. But he had seen the girl beneath the servant as he had seen the gold beneath the violet, and the 2 sights lay down together in his mind and would not be parted. Whoever she was not Rowan Ashe of Bath, and whoever she feared, in this house, at this table, he had a growing, cold suspicion that the man sat at his mother's right hand, drinking his mother's wine and speaking of the Fenwicks with a thief's fondness for the scene of his own work. Dinner ended. Augusta rose. The ivory cane found the floor. The ladies, such as they were, withdrew. Rowan went out ahead of the Dowager, with her eyes down and her spine straight, and in the doorway she could not help it. She glanced back, one glance, quick as a thief's, to see whether the Duke watched still. He did. He stood behind his chair with his hand flat on its back and his ice-blue gaze on her across the ruin of the table. And he was not bored, and he was not resigned, and he was not the tired man who had come in out of the snow to be married off like a prize bull. He looked at her, as at a door he had at last found the key to. Rowan turned and went out and did not look again. In the withdrawing room, the fire was as mean as the one in the drawing room, and Augusta settled into her chair beside it and arranged the cameo at her throat and looked at the companion who had come to stand by the card table with her hands folded. "Sit," Augusta said. Rowan sat on the low stool, which was where the Dowager preferred her, below the eye and within reach of the voice. "You looked at Sir Rowland at dinner," Augusta said. She said it the way she opened a book, without appetite, only to see what was written. A companion does not look at a gentleman as though she has an opinion of him. Had you an opinion of him? No, your grace. You had. I saw your chin. My eyes are 60 years old and they miss nothing that happens below my own roof. You would do well to remember it. She turned the cameo a quarter turn. You will keep your face still when there are guests, or you will keep it in the servants' hall. Do you understand me? Perfectly, your grace. And my son. Here Augusta paused, and the pause had weight. My son thanked you for a cup of tea. My son has not thanked a servant since he was breeched. You will contrive, while he is in this house, to give him no further occasion. You will be where he is not. You will pour when he is elsewhere. If I find you underfoot when Lady Seraphina comes, you will find yourself back on the Bath Road with a character that will get you employment nowhere between here and the sea. She let that settle, then lifted her chin toward the escritoire. Now the book. Read where you left off. My head aches and your voice, at least, does not require me to think. So Rowan took up the volume of sermons and read into the mean firelight, and her voice was steady and low and gave nothing away, and behind it her mind ran on down a corridor she could not close. He thanked me, and she saw it, and now I am to be invisible again, and I want nothing on this earth so much as to be invisible, and yet, for 1/2 second over a cup of tea, a man had looked at her as though she were a person, and it had gone through her like warmth through a body too long cold, and the wanting of that was more dangerous than any of Hargrave's schemes, because it belonged to her and not to him. She read on. Augusta's eyes closed. The clock in the corner told off the quarters, and the snow went on against the shutters, patient and soft, filling the world outside to the sills. 2 floors below, and at the cold end of the house, a candle moved. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pardoe, kept her ledger in a narrow room off the still room, and she rose from her chair in some alarm when the Duke himself ducked under her lintel with a candle in his hand and asked, quite pleasantly, to see her book. She fetched it. She did not ask why. One did not ask a duke why. Julian set the candle down and turned the pages with one finger. Wages, deliveries, the comings and goings of a great house set down in a plain round hand. He found the season's engagements. And there, between the second undergardener and a girl taken on for the laundry, an entry 3 months old, companion to her grace, by recommendation of Mrs. Selwyn's agency, Milsom Street, Bath, and a name, Rowan Ashe. He looked at it a long moment. And then he looked at Mrs. Pardoe. This woman, he said, did she bring letters? A character? A character from the agency, your grace. Naught else? She came with the one box and the clothes she stood in. Mrs. Pardoe hesitated, then, because he waited, went on. A quiet body, sir, gives no trouble. Keeps herself to herself, reads to her grace, and does her mending and asks for nothing. A small frown. Odd only in this. She speaks like a lady when she forgets not to. I put it down to the reading. Yes, Julian said softly. I dare say that is what it is. He closed the book. He thanked the housekeeper, who was more unsettled by the courtesy than she would have been by a reprimand, and he carried his candle back through the sleeping house with the name burning behind his eyes. Rowan Ashe, Milsom Street. A character and a box and no letters. It was thin as paper, that identity, the sort of thing a frightened woman assembles in a hurry and hopes no one will hold to the light. He meant to hold it to the light. At the foot of the great stair he stopped. Above him the house lay dark, and somewhere in it she was reading a dying language of sermons to his mother, or lying awake, or standing at some black window, as he had once imagined the woman with the lantern must stand at windows, looking out at weather. He had promised himself, 3 years running, that if he ever found her, he would pay what he owed and be free of the debt that had made him reckless on cold roads. He had thought it a simple thing, a purse, a settlement, a word. He stood at the foot of his own stair and understood that it would not be simple at all. A purse would not answer a woman who fled her own name. Whoever Rowan Ashe had been before Bath, he would have it out of her, patiently, if she let him. Some other way, if she did not. He would stay his fortnight. He would watch. And he would learn, before the frost broke and the veins came and his mother's careful cage closed, who the woman with gold in her eye truly was, and what it was, in this cold house full of Hargrave's smiling talk, that a lady in a servant's gray dress had taught herself to be so afraid of. By first light, Julian was in the stable yard, breaking the ice on the trough with the heel of his boot before any groom had risen. He told himself it was the horse. The gray mare needed exercise after the storm, and a man who had ridden 40 miles through snow was owed a quiet hour with the reins in his hands. That was the reason he gave. It was a lie, and he knew the shape of it even as he made it. He wanted to see where she walked. The companion took the kitchen path at 6:30. He had learned this the way a man learns the habits of a thing he means to understand, by rising earlier than it did. She came out with a basket on her arm, sent to the henhouse for eggs the cook would not fetch herself in such cold, and she went with her head down and her shawl pulled close, a gray figure against gray snow. But she did not walk like a servant. Julian stood in the shadow of the stable door and watched her cross the yard. Her spine was straight, her steps were measured, unhurried, the gait of a woman who had once been taught to enter a room where people were waiting to judge her. A drudge scurried. This one moved as though the yard belonged to her and she was merely passing through it on her way to something better. He filed the observation away with the others. She reached the henhouse, and there she stopped, and for a moment she did not go in. She stood with her gloved hand flat against the rough door, her face turned to the pale seam of light in the east, and she breathed. Just that. She let the cold fill her and she let it go, and her shoulders came down 1/2 inch, and only then did she lift the latch. Julian had seen soldiers do the same before a charge. He had done it himself, on the Dover road, 3 years gone, with his own blood warm in the straw. The thought arrived before he could stop it, and it lodged. He said nothing. He turned the mare back into her stall, and he went in to a breakfast his mother took in bitter silence, and all through the cold eggs and the colder talk of the Vaneses' coming visit, he was somewhere else entirely, watching a gray woman breathe against a henhouse door and finding in that small private ritual the first true thing he had learned about her. The frost did not break, it deepened. For 3 days the roads out of Shropshire lay under a foot of snow, and no carriage could come or go, and the Vanes' arrival, promised within the fortnight, receded into a matter of when the thaw pleased to arrive. Augusta was made furious by weather she could not command. Hargrave, snowed in as thoroughly as any of them, made himself a fixture at the fireside and drank the good port and talked, and Julian discovered that a house sealed by winter is a very small house indeed, and that in a small house one cannot help but keep meeting the same face. He arranged it so. He would not have called it that. He would have said he was a guest with time on his hands and a library to occupy him, but the library was where the companion was sent each afternoon to read to the Dowager, and Julian took to the library, and so they were in the same long, cold room a great deal, the 3 of them, and sometimes, when Augusta dozed over her needlework, only 2. The first afternoon he simply watched. She read well. He had expected the flat drone of a hired voice, and instead, she gave the words their weight, and when the sermon turned to a passage about the ruin of proud houses, her voice did not falter but it thinned, the way a thread thins where it has been pulled too often, and Julian marked the place and said nothing. The second afternoon he spoke to her. "You read Cowper as though you have grieved him," he said, when Augusta's chin had sunk to her cameo, and her breath had gone even. Most people read him as though he were furniture. The book stilled in her hands. She did not look up at once. When she did, she had put the fear away somewhere he could not reach it, and what she showed him was a servant's blankness, polished and complete. "I read as I am instructed, Your Grace." "You read better than you are instructed." He let the silence sit. "Where did you learn it?" "An agency in Bath, Your Grace, Mrs. Selwyn's. They are particular about elocution." It was a good answer. It was smooth, and it was quick, and it closed the door gently in his face, and Julian admired it, even as he refused it. He had spent his life among people trained to lie beautifully. He knew the difference between a lie told to deceive and a lie told to survive, and hers was the second kind, and it moved something in him he had thought long frozen. "Mrs. Selwyn's," he repeated. "Of course." He let her go back to her reading, but he had seen the thing he came to see. When he had said the word grieved, Her thumb had pressed white against the spine of the book, and for the length of a breath the servant had gone, and a lady had looked out at him from behind those extraordinary eyes, the violet, the gold in the left, and the lady had been afraid of exactly one thing: being known. That night Julian did not sleep. He sat by his own fire with a glass he did not drink, and he turned the pieces over. A companion who moved like a peer, hands that knew good plate, a voice that grieved a poet no shopgirl had ever been taught to love, a false name thin as paper, and behind all of it, drawn tight as a wire, a fear that woke and slept with her and answered, he was nearly certain now, to the name of Roland Hargrave. He did not yet know she was Fenwick's daughter. He did not yet know the charge had been forged. He knew only that a woman had saved his life on a rainy road and vanished, and that 3 years and 4 counties later she was pouring his mother's tea in a gray dress and a black velvet ribbon, and that whatever had brought her so low, she had chosen to bear it standing. A precise, elegant courage. It undid him more than beauty could have. By the 5th day the sky cleared to a hard enamel blue, and Julian, who could not sit still, ordered the mare saddled again and rode out past the home farm to where the old tithe barn stood at the edge of the west field. He had a reason. He always had a reason. The steward wished to know whether the barn's roof had held under the snow, and a duke might as well look at his own roof as sit indoors listening to Hargrave. He did not know she would be there. She had been sent with the still-room maid to fetch stored apples from the loft, and the maid had gone back with the first basket, and Aurelia was alone in the great dim barn when the door opened and the light fell in, and a man's shadow stretched long across the straw. She turned with an apple in her hand, and she saw who it was, and the apple was very still. Julian stopped in the doorway. He had come in from the glare and his eyes had not adjusted, and for a moment he saw only her shape against the loft ladder, the straw, the lantern hung on its nail, the smell of cold hay and old wood, and something in him lurched sideways, out of Shropshire, out of the present, into a night 3 years dead. A barn, a lantern, straw beneath his cheek, a woman's voice telling him to hold still, to stay with her. That morning would come. He had not seen her face that night. He had seen her eyes by lantern light, once, when she leaned close to tie the binding, violet, and gold in the left, like a flaw in a jewel that made it worth more. The apple, he thought. The lantern. Dear God. You, he said. It came out of him before judgment could catch it, low and rough, and Aurelia heard in that single word that the thing she had feared for 5 days had finally happened, and she did the only thing left to her. She set the apple down in the basket, and she folded her hands, and she gave him the blank face. Your Grace startled me. I was sent for the apples. I'll not be a moment. Stop. He came in. He let the door swing half shut behind him so the light narrowed, and he crossed the straw until he stood a careful arm's length from her, close enough to be certain, and he looked at her eyes in the barn's dim gold, the way a man looks at a face he has carried 3 years behind his own. Look at me. Your Grace. Look at me. She lifted her eyes to his. She had known this moment must come from the instant he froze over the teacup, and she had rehearsed 100 denials, and every one of them died in the cold air between them, because he was not asking a question. He was confirming a fact he already possessed. The Dover Road, he said quietly. 3 years passed. October. The coach went over on the hill above the ford, and the driver ran and left me under it, and I bled into the ditch, and I was ready to die there, and a girl came out of the dark with a lantern. His voice did not rise, it went lower and steadier and more terrible for it. She cut her own petticoat. She bound me so tight I could breathe. She dragged me to a barn not unlike this one, and she kept me alive until the gray came, and then she was gone before I could ask her name. Aurelia stood very still. A single strand of hay drifted down from the loft between them. I have looked for that girl, Julian said, for 3 years, 4 counties, every inn on the Dover Road. I had begun to believe I dreamed her. He paused. I did not dream her eyes. You are mistaken. Her voice was steady. That cost her everything she had. I have never been on the Dover Road, Your Grace. I am from Bath. You are lying. He said it without anger, almost gently, the way one names the weather. You lie very well. You have had to. But I have watched you for 5 days, and I have watched you breathe against doors before you can bear to open them. and I know the difference now between the woman and the gray dress. So do not tell me you are from Bath." He drew a slow breath. "Tell me why the woman who saved my life is hiding in my mother's house under a name that is not hers, afraid of a man who sits at my mother's table." The word "afraid" landed like a hand closing over a wound. She turned from him. She put her back to him, and she looked at the lantern on its nail. And for a moment, Julian thought he had lost her, that the servant would come back, and the door would close, and he would be left with nothing but certainty and no truth to hang it on. Then he saw her shoulders, the straight, proud line of them, begin, very slightly, to shake. Not weeping. Something harder than weeping, held in. "If I say yes," she said to the lantern, "you have my life in your hand. Do you understand that? One word from you to your mother, one word to them, and I have nowhere left to go. I have run out of counties too, your grace. Bath was the last of them." She turned back, and now the blankness was gone, and what stood in its place was worse and truer, a woman with nothing left but the naked fact of herself. "So before I say yes or no to anything, I will ask a question. What will you do with it?" It was not the question of a servant. It was the question of an equal, and it struck Julian silent. Here was a woman ruined, hunted, reduced to reading sermons for a cruel old woman's amusement, and she had just, in a cold barn, demanded terms of a duke before she would grant him the truth she owed him. She had saved his life and asked nothing. Now she asked the only thing that mattered. "I owe you a debt," he said at last. "I have owed it 3 years, and it has not let me rest. You gave me my life, and asked nothing, and vanished, and I have hated that you would not let me pay it." He took off his glove, slowly, and Aurelia watched the gold signet catch the lantern light. "I will not spend it against you. Whatever your name is, whatever brought you here, my word on it, and I do not give my word to servants, so understand what I am telling you by giving it to you now." She looked at the ring, she looked at his bare hand, and something in the set of her face, the thing that had held for 5 days, for 3 months, for 3 years, did not break, but eased. "Aurelia," she said. "Just that." He waited, and she gave him no more, and he understood that the surname was a country she was not yet ready to let him cross into, and that this, one true name, in a cold barn, offered like a coin laid on a scale, was the whole of what she could afford today. "Aurelia," he repeated, and in his mouth it was not a servant's name at all. It was a thing recovered. He had carried a pair of eyes for 3 years, and now he had a name to hang beneath them, and the having of it changed the weight of the room. She saw the change, and it frightened her more than his suspicion had. A duke who owed you nothing was a danger you could measure. A duke who felt he owed you everything was a force you could not. The still-room maid's voice came calling across the yard, and the moment folded shut. Aurelia caught up her basket. "Say nothing," she said, low and fast. "Not to her, not to anyone. If you mean your word, that is how you keep it." And she was past him, and out into the glare, before the maid rounded the corner, a gray companion with a basket of apples, head down, invisible again. Julian stood alone in the barn a long while after, turning the ring on his finger, and did not go and look at the roof at all. The thaw came slow, and in its slowness, a strange season took hold at Corbridge Hall. Outwardly nothing changed. Augusta ruled her cold rooms. Hargrave drank and talked and waited for the roads. The companion was invisible, exactly as ordered, and served tea when the Duke was elsewhere and vanished when he was near. And to any eye in the house, she and Julian Marbury were nothing to one another. A great lord and a hired grey nobody, who did not so much as raise her eyes to him. But a debt had been named between them, and a name had been given, and neither of them was the same. It showed in small things, in the currency of a sealed house. A book left where she would find it, not Cowper's sermons but his letters, warmer stuff, with one page turned down at a passage about a caged hare set free. She read it and understood and left it turned down when she gave it back. A word from her, once, murmured as she cleared his cup. "The port on the sideboard is from the Hargrave cellars. He sends it ahead of himself, everywhere he means to be welcome. He has done it here." Julian did not so much as glance up, but he stopped drinking the port, and Hargrave, 3 days later, remarked with a puzzled frown that the Duke had gone off good wine, and never knew why. She was, Julian slowly understood, giving him something, not gratitude, Not the debt paid back. Intelligence. Quietly, from the invisible corner of a house that thought her furniture, the gray companion was watching Roland Hargrave with the patience of a woman who had all the time in the world and one purpose to fill it. And she was feeding what she saw to the one man in the house with the power to use it. And she was doing it in exchange for nothing at all, on nothing but his bare word given in a barn. It was the boldest thing he had ever watched anyone do, and she did it in a gray dress with her eyes down. "Why him?" he asked her once. In the library, with Augusta asleep. He had learned to speak without turning his head, to move his lips as little as a man might. You watch Hargrave the way a cat watches a hole. Why? The needle of her honesty went in clean. "Because he is a thief," she said, to the book in her lap, "and no one at this table will ever suspect it. Because he pays for the wine." A pause. "And because thieves who are never suspected grow careless. I am waiting for him to be careless." "You could tell me what he stole." "Not yet." Her thumb pressed the spine white. "When I tell you, Your Grace, you will have to act on it, and if you act too soon and fail, he will bury me so deep I will never come up. I have seen him bury a man before." She turned a page she was not reading. "I will tell you when telling you can end him. Not before." Julian sat with that. A woman who had saved his life was now, deliberately, coldly, building a case in the dark, gathering, waiting, arming, and refusing to fire until the shot could not miss. She had nothing, no name she would own, no home, no protector but a duke's word 5 days old. And she was playing a longer game than any man at that table, and playing it better. He tested her once more, because he could not help it. "And if I ordered you to tell me now? I am the master of this house." For the first time she looked at him full on, and there was iron in it. "Then you would learn nothing worth having, and I would learn what your word is worth." She let that sit. "You may command a servant, Your Grace. You cannot command a witness. I am the second thing to you, whatever the housekeeper's book says, and we both know it, or you would not be whispering to me over a sleeping woman's needlework." It should have angered a duke. It did not. It steadied him, the way a firm hand on the bridle steadies a horse, the sense of meeting something that would not be pushed. He had been surrounded all his life by people who bent when he leaned. This one had bent so far the world thought her broken, and had not broken, and would not bend to him either. He found he did not want her to. There was a morning, too, that he did not forget. Hargrave, restless with the thaw, came upon her alone in the passage carrying the Dowager's chocolate, and stopped her, and looked at her the way a man appraises a horse he thinks underpriced. "Do I know your people, girl?" There's something in the eyes. Julian, unseen at the stairhead, went very still. One word wrong, and the whole fragile scaffold came down. But Aurelia only dropped her lashes, and her voice went flat as a scullery maid's. "No people to speak of, sir." "Bath, sir. Would you let me pass? The chocolate's going cold." And Hargrave grunted and let her by, and the danger closed over like water, and Julian understood that she had been surviving exactly this, alone, without a duke on the stairs, for 3 long years. She was playing a longer game than any man at that table, and playing it better. "You are not what you seem," he said. "No one at this table is, Your Grace." She closed the book as Augusta stirred. "You least of all. You came here to be married, and you spend your days learning the reading habits of your mother's servant." She rose, smoothed her gray skirt, and dropped him a curtsy that lasted precisely 1 beat too long. Long enough for only him to feel the mockery in it, the flash of Lady Aurelia Fenwick, who had once curtsied to no one below an earl. "Her Grace is waking. You should go and be a duke." She was gone before he could answer, and Julian sat in the cold library and laughed, once, under his breath, a sound he had not made in 3 years, and understood, with something close to alarm, that the debt he had ridden 4 counties to pay had quietly become the only thing in his life he did not want to be finished with. The roads dried. Word came ahead of the veins at last. Lady Seraphina and her mother would arrive within the week, the ice being broken, the season being upon them, the marriage, Augusta's letter said with satisfaction, being now a matter of arrangement rather than hope. Hargrave heard it and smiled his oiled smile and spoke of settlements. And Julian, who a fortnight before had ridden to Corbridge resigned to all of it, sat at the head of his mother's table that night, and knew, with the cold clarity of a man who has changed his mind and not yet told anyone, that he would not marry Seraphina Vane. He did not say so, Not yet. But upstairs, in the narrow, cold room the house had given its companion, Aurelia Fenwick knelt by her single candle and drew out from beneath her stays the letter she had carried against her heart for 3 years. My Aurelia. At the top, I have done nothing that you need be ashamed to own. At the foot, and she read it once, as she read it every night, and then she did something she had not done since the day her father died. She began, very carefully, in her own hand, on a scrap of paper begged from the still room, to write down everything she had heard Roland Hargrave say in this house, the date he came, the wine he sent, the words, I made certain of that. She wrote it small, and she wrote it plain, and when she had done she folded it inside her father's letter and put them both back over her heart, and she blew out the candle, and in the dark she was not afraid. She was building something, brick by silent brick, and a duke had given his word, and the Vanes were coming, and somewhere below her, in the sleeping house, Roland Hargrave was growing careless at last. The letter went out at first light, sealed with the gold signet, and carried south by a groom who did not ask why a duke wrote to his solicitor before he had taken his coffee. Julian stood at the study window and watched the horse take the Shrewsbury road, its breath white against the black hedgerows, and only when the rider had gone from sight did he turn back to the desk. He had written 6 lines, bring the Fenwick papers. Bring everything the firm holds on the Corbridge settlements of the last 3 years. Bring yourself, Whitcomb, and come quietly. The word quietly had cost him a moment's thought. He was not a man who moved in secret under his own roof, but the roof was his mother's as much as his, and Hargrave sat beneath it eating her partridge and pouring her his port, and Julian had learned, in a fortnight, that a thing spoken aloud in this house reached the drawing-room before the plate was cleared. 3 days he waited. 3 days in which he did nothing a watching eye could name. He rode the west fields. He sat through dinner and let his mother speak of settlements as though they were weather. He watched Hargrave's rings catch the candlelight and thought of a line drawn once through a ledger, a single forged line, and a baronet dead inside the 12-month. It was a peculiar torture, that waiting. He had spent his life able to act, to sign, to send, to command a thing done and see it done by morning. Now he must sit on his hands and smile. On the second evening, Hargrave leaned back over the walnuts and spoke of the coming ball, as a general speaks of a battle already won, and Augusta laughed, and Julian raised his glass a half-inch and set it down and said nothing, and the effort of the nothing left him tired as a day's riding. Across the table, at its cold foot, the companion sat with her eyes on her plate and her hands folded, and once, only once, her gaze lifted and crossed his, a half-second, no more. He gave her nothing back. He had learned that much already, that to be seen looking at her was to endanger her, and so he schooled his face to the flat courtesy he gave the footman, and hated it, and kept it. Whitcomb arrived on the 4th evening, after the household had gone up, his traveling coach brought round to the stable court, rather than the front sweep. He was a small man, bald but for a fringe combed sideways, his fingers stained black at the tips where the ink had worked into the skin over 20 years. He carried a leather case under his arm as another man might carry a child. Your Grace, he bowed. His eyes went once round the cold study, marking the 2 doors, the shuttered window. You said quietly, I have told my clerk I am gone to Bath for my chest. Sit. Julian poured him wine himself, which told Whitcomb more than the letter had. You brought the Fenwick file. I brought what the firm holds. The solicitor set the case on the desk and unbuckled it. Though I confess, Your Grace, I do not see what a 9-year-old bankruptcy in Shropshire has to do with your marriage settlement. Neither do I. Yet. Julian sat across from him. Show me the settlement first, the Vane arrangement, every figure. Whitcomb drew out a folded packet tied in green tape and laid the pages flat, smoothing them with a stained thumb. He talked as he went, the dry, exact talk of a man who had never in his life rounded a sum. The Vane estate, he said, was mortgaged to the roof tree. Old Lord Vane had died leaving his daughter a name, a face, and £40,000 of debt dressed as a dowry. Then where is the money? Julian said. My mother speaks of Lady Seraphina's fortune. You tell me the family has none. They have none, Your Grace. The fortune is promised. Whitcomb turned a page. Underwritten. There is a guarantor, a gentleman who has undertaken to clear the Vane encumbrances upon the marriage, and to settle upon Lady Seraphina the sum your mother names as her portion." Something cold and still moved behind Julian's eyes. "Name him." The solicitor did not need to look. "Sir Roland Hargrave." The fire spat. The Julian rose and went to it, and stood with his back to the little man, and for a moment, the only sound was the collapse of a coal. He had known Hargrave lent the port. He had not known the man lent the bride. "Explain it to me plainly," he said, "as you would to a jury." "Plainly, then." Whitcomb folded his stained hands. "Sir Roland pays the vain debts. In exchange, Lady Seraphina brings you a dowry that is, in truth, Sir Roland's money. You marry a beauty and a fortune, both of them his. And you, your grace, you become a man who owes the whole of his wife's settlement to a single creditor. Not a debt of money, a debt of arrangement. He will have made the match. He will hold the paper. Every year of your marriage he sits at your table by right, and your mother thanks him for it. And the profit to him? Position." The word came flat and certain. "A man like Sir Roland does not buy a girl a husband for love of the girl. He buys the standing. He becomes the intimate of the house of Corbridge. Doors that have never opened to him open. And a man with such doors open to him," Whitcomb paused, choosing the ground, "can move a very great deal of money through them, your grace, and be asked no questions, because who questions the friend of a duke?" Julian turned from the fire. "You have seen this before. I have seen the shape of it before." The solicitor met his eye without flinching. "The name I had not seen, but I know the shape. It is how such men climb. They do not steal a house. They marry into the family that owns it, and then hold the door." For a long moment Julian said nothing. Above them, somewhere in the sleeping house, a board settled. He thought of a gray dress at the foot of the dinner table, and a fork that had gone still, and a voice at his shoulder that had told him, quietly, whose cellar the wine came from. He ships the wine ahead of where he wishes to be welcome. She had understood the man in a sentence. He was only now, with a solicitor's ledger, catching her up. "Now the Fenwick file," he said. "You wondered what it has to do with my marriage. Humor me." Whitcomb retied the green tape with a small sigh and drew out a second bundle, older, the paper gone the color of weak tea. "Sir Henry Fenwick, Baronet of Marrowby. A sad business, and an old one. He held certain trusts, widows' portions chiefly, moneys left in his charge for the relief of tenants' families. In the spring of the year 9, an examination of his books found a sum removed, some £1,100, transferred out under his own hand and never returned. The signature was his. The disgrace was total. He surrendered the trusts, sold what the sale would cover, and died within the year." He looked up. "The firm handled a portion of the estate's winding up. That is why we hold the papers." "His own hand," Julian said. "You are certain of the signature." "The commissioners were certain, your grace. There was a comparison made. I have the sheet here." Whitcomb drew out a single leaf and laid it in the lamplight, and there, side by side, were two signatures, Henry Fenwick and Henry Fenwick, copied fair by some long-dead clerk for the examination. "You see, the disputed transfer, and 3 specimens known to be true. The commissioners judged them the same hand." Julian bent over the page. He had a good eye. He had signed 1,000 papers and watched other men sign as many, and he knew what a man's own name looked like when his own hand made it, and what it looked like when another hand made it slowly, with care, watching itself. "Whitcomb," he said, "look at the loop of the H." The solicitor looked. In the 3 true ones the loop runs on. He wrote his name 1,000 times. It flows. The pen never lifts between the H and the E. Here, Julian's finger touched the disputed line. The pen lifts. Look at it. The H is drawn. Then the rest is drawn to match it. A man does not draw his own name. He throws it down. Whitcomb was silent a long moment. He drew a glass from his waistcoat, a small round lens on a black ribbon, and set it to his eye, and bent until his stained nose near touched the paper. When he straightened, his face had changed. The dryness had gone out of it. "I have handled this sheet for 9 years," he said slowly, "as the proof of a thief. I never set it beside its own specimens with a glass. There was no reason. The man was dead and confessed by his silence." He lowered the lens. "You are right, your grace. This is drawn. This is a forged hand watching a true one. Then Sir Henry Fenwick stole nothing. Then someone wished it to appear that he did." Whitcomb's voice had dropped. "Careful now. a man stepping onto ice, and went to the trouble of a good forgery to do it, which is expense and risk and intent. One does not forge a baronet's name to £1,100 for sport. There was a purpose in ruining that man. What purpose? Julian said. He was a small baronet in a small county. Who profits by breaking him? That, the paper does not say. Whitcomb began to gather the sheets, then stopped, his hand flat upon them. But you did not send for the Fenwick file by accident, Your Grace. You set these two matters before me in one night, the Vane settlement and the Fenwick ruin, and you asked me to see them together. I have learned not to believe in the coincidences my clients arrange. He looked up, and behind the small glasses his eyes were shrewd. What is it you already know that I do not? Julian did not answer at once. He crossed to the window and put his hand to the shutter as though he would open it on the dark, and did not. There was a thing he had promised. I will not use it against you. He had given his word in a barn with the ring on his hand, and the word had been given to a woman who called herself Rowan Ash and had trusted him with one name only. To tell Whitcomb now, to say aloud the thing he had begun to know, was to spend a coin that was not his. And yet the coin, unspent, was worth nothing to her at all. There is a young woman in this house, Julian said, still facing the shutter. My mother's companion. She came 3 months ago from an agency in Bath. She has no people, no letters, one box, and the clothes on her back. He turned. She was reared at a good table. She reads Cowper as though she had lost the man, and when Hargrave speaks of the Fenwick case at dinner, her hand stops. Whitcomb had gone very still. I do not know her surname, Julian said. She has given me only the one name, Aurelia. The solicitor set down his pen. He drew the winding-up papers toward him again, turning the leaves with a care that had become reverence, until he found the page he wanted, and read from it in the flat voice of a man reading fact into a record. The said Sir Henry Fenwick was survived by one child, a daughter, Aurelia Fenwick, then aged some 19 years, for whom no provision could be found within the encumbered estate. He looked up over the glasses. The estate could not keep her, Your Grace. She was of age, unwed, unportioned, and disgraced in her father's name. Such a girl has 3 roads, a charity, a poorhouse. He let a beat fall, or a false name and an honest wage in a house far from anyone who knew her face. The room was very quiet. The fire had burned low, and neither man had thought to feed it. Aurelia Fenwick, Julian said. There cannot be 2, Your Grace, not of that age, of that rearing, with that name, hiding in a great house within a day's ride of the county her father was broken in. Whitcomb took off the glasses and folded them with unsteady care. You have your mother's companion serving tea to the man whose settlement I have just been reading. And if the Fenwick ruin was forged, he stopped, and the last of it came out barely above the coals, then the girl pouring that tea is the one living creature with cause to know it, and reason to stay near the man who did it. She knows, Julian said. She has told me a crime was done. She has not told me by whom, or what. She said she would tell it only when the telling could end the man. He heard his own voice go rough and did not care. She has been building a case, Whitcomb, alone, in a cold room, for 3 years, while the man who broke her father sat downstairs and called her a quiet mouse. Whitcomb was a dry man and an old one, and he had wound up 100 ruined estates without a tremor, but he sat now with the papers under his stained hands and looked at nothing for the space of several breaths. If this is true, he said at last, then we hold half a case and she holds the other half, and neither half hangs him. A forged signature 9 years cold proves a forgery. It does not prove the forger. For that we should need his hand somewhere it ought not to be, a paper, a book, a transfer that runs from Fenwick's ruin to Hargrave's gain. He tapped the file. The motive is what I cannot find. Why break Sir Henry Fenwick? What did the man own that Sir Rowland wanted? Marrowby, Julian said. A small estate. A small estate on the West Road. Julian was moving now, quick, the pieces turning. What lies west of Marrowby? Whitcomb. What did that road carry before the canal came through? The solicitor's mouth opened. He drew out a fresh sheet and a pencil and began, half to himself, to draw a line. A road, a river, a ruined house. And Julian watched a man of numbers begin to see the shape of a theft that had taken 9 years and cost a baronet his life, and could not yet finish it. The canal, Whitcomb said, low, the pencil moving. They cut the Western Canal in the year 11, 2 years after Sir Henry fell. I remember the company, a great fuss of shares, gentlemen made rich overnight, who had bought the right land before the line was fixed. He glanced up. A canal must have its water. It follows the low ground, the river's own path. And a river's path, your grace, runs through whatever estate God set upon it, whether the owner will sell or no. And if the owner would not sell, then the company must go round him, at ruinous cost, or the owner must be got out of the way. Whitcomb set the pencil down with the care of a man laying down a loaded thing. A solvent baronet cannot be bought against his will, but a disgraced one, dead of shame, his estate seized and sold at auction to whatever bidder the county will not question, that owner sells. That owner is made to sell by the very ruin that killed him. He looked at the little map he had drawn. I do not yet know who bought Marrowby at that auction, your grace. But I would wager my chambers it was bought cheap, by a man of straw, and sold dear to the canal 3 years on, and I would wager the profit on that turn was reckoned not in hundreds, but in tens of thousands. Julian stood over the sketch a long moment. So it was never £1,100. £1,100 was the knife, Whitcomb said. The estate was the throat. We shall need the county rolls, Whitcomb murmured. The tithe maps, the canal company's book of purchases. If Marrowby lay across the water's path, and Sir Henry would not sell. He stopped himself. He looked up, and the old caution came back into his face, and with it something harder. This cannot be done from Corbridge, your grace. Not with the man in the house. If Sir Rowland learns that the Fenwick file has been opened, he will know within the day who opened it and why, and he is not a man to be caught looking backward. He will move against the girl first. She is the only witness who could name him, and she has no name of her own to shield her. A companion turned off without a character vanishes. No one asks. Then we do not let him learn it. We cannot help his learning it if we go on under his eye. Whitcomb began, rapidly, to gather and tie the files. I must go back, tonight, before the house wakes. I must have the canal book, the rolls, the tithe maps, a fortnight's quiet work in London where no groom of this house can carry word of it. And you, your grace? He fixed Julian with the flat, fearless look of a small man who has decided a large thing. Must do the hardest part. You must do nothing. You must let the settlement go forward as though you meant to sign it. You must be dull. You must let Sir Rowland believe he has won, so that he grows careless a little longer, because a careless man leaves his hand where a careful one would not. Julian stood over him. You ask me to sit at that table and watch him arrange my marriage, and say nothing, and watch her pour his wine, and say nothing. I ask you to keep her alive until we can hang him, Whitcomb said simply. A word from you now, a look he can read, and she is gone from this house in a night, and we have lost the one witness and warned the one man. Silence is the only shield she has, yours and hers both. The truth of it settled on Julian like cold water, and he took it, because it was true. He looked at the shuttered window a long moment. Somewhere above and behind him, in a room without a fire, was a woman who had told him she had seen Hargrave bury a man, and who had asked him, before she gave him even her first name, what he would do with the truth. She had known this. She had known all of it, or the heart of it, long before a solicitor rode up in the dark with a leather case. She had simply understood, as he was only now understanding, that a truth spoken too soon is not a weapon but a grave. There is one thing more, Julian said, low. She keeps papers. She told me she has written down what she has heard him say. Dates. The wine. A thing he said aloud. I made certain of that. She carries it against her, with a letter from her father. Whitcomb's hands went still on the green tape. If she has kept a record, the solicitor said carefully, made in her own hand, day by day, of the words of the man, and if we can set it beside the forged transfer, and the canal purchases, and the settlement that pays for your bride out of his pocket. He did not finish. He did not need to. He looked up at the Duke, and for the first time that night something like hope moved in his dry face. Then she is not a witness we protect, your grace. She is the case. She built it. We have only to keep her breathing long enough to bring it into a room he cannot walk out of. A room, Julian said. A public room. Witnesses of rank. Papers no one can call a servant's spite. Whitcomb buckled the case. You cannot destroy a man like Sir Rowland in a magistrate's back office. He owns half the magistrates in the county. You destroy him in the open. before people who matter, with paper in your hand and the law already summoned, so that his friends cannot pretend it away. He rose, tucking the case under his arm. You will forgive me, Your Grace, but I believe your mother spoke of a ball. Something in Julian went very quiet and very sure. When the ice breaks, he said, she means to settle certain matters at it. Then let her hold her ball. Whitcomb bowed, and let us give her rather more to settle than she intends. He was gone within the hour, his coach slipping out of the stable court with its lamps hooded, south into the dark, carrying half a case that could not yet hang a man. Julian stood alone in the cold study and let the fire die, and thought. He had come to this house resigned to a marriage he did not want, and a debt he could not repay. He had found the debt and the marriage were the same knot, and the man who had tied it, and the woman he had spent 3 years and 4 counties looking for, all of them under one roof, all of them within 30 feet of one another, none of them yet named aloud. He held it now, the whole shape of it, and could speak none of it, to anyone, without spending her life. Do nothing, be dull, let him win. It was the hardest instruction he had ever been given, and he meant to obey it to the letter. He went up at last in the gray hour before dawn. The passage was black and cold, and his own hand kept it. No candle, a man who did not wish to be seen, and as he came to the turn of the stair he stopped, because a thread of light lay under a far door, the small door at the end of the servants' passage, the companion's door, and he knew, without going nearer, that she was awake at this hour as he was, sitting in the cold with a letter and a written page held against her, keeping her own long watch. He did not go to her. He had given his word, and the word tonight meant silence. But he stood in the dark and looked at the line of light a moment longer than a man should, and made her, silently, a second promise she could not hear, that the case she had built alone in that cold room, she would not have to carry alone to the end of it. That when the ice broke, and the great rooms filled, and the man came smiling among the candles certain he had won, there would be 2 of them who knew the truth, and one of them a duke. Then he went to his own door, and the light at the end of the passage burned on behind him, and somewhere below in the sleeping house Sir Rowland Hargrave slept the sound sleep of a man who believed the only person alive who could name him was a quiet mouse from Bath with no people and no name, and did not dream that a solicitor's coach had just carried the first thread of his ruin south into the dark. The Vane carriage came up the drive on the first firm morning in a fortnight, and Aurelia watched it from the still-room window with a tray of candle ends going cold in her hands. 2 women descended. The mother moved like a woman counting the windows and dividing them among her creditors. The daughter did not look at the house at all. Lady Seraphina Vane crossed the frozen gravel as though the ground had been laid for her that hour, cast one glance at the great door, and found it wanting. Aurelia set the tray down. She had known this face would come. She had not known it would arrive already bored. By evening the house had changed its weather. Fires that had been kept mean for a companion roared for a guest. Augusta rose from her chair without her cane to greet the Vanes in the hall, and the effort cost her, and she paid it gladly. Seraphina let her cloak be taken, let her hands be pressed, let herself be admired, and gave back exactly the warmth a lender gives a debtor who is not yet late. Julian bowed over her glove. He said the correct things. Aurelia, invisible at the foot of the stair, with an armful of the guest's wraps, saw him do it, and saw what it cost him nothing, and understood that this was the performance she had asked of him. It steadied her. It also opened, somewhere under the ribs, a small cold door she had thought long since nailed shut. 3 days the party settled. Then Augusta announced there would be a musical evening. Not a ball. The ice had broken, but the roads to the county families were still bad, and a great ball wanted a fortnight's notice and 100 candles. This would be smaller. A soirée. The neighboring gentry within a safe drive, the Marches, old Colonel Pruitt, the rector's musical wife, the 2 Miss Ossories who sang, perhaps 30 souls in the long drawing-room, with the pianoforte uncovered and the girandoles lit, and Seraphina Vane displayed against them like a jewel brought out on approval. You will pour, Augusta told the companion. You will turn the pages for Lady Seraphina, who plays. You will otherwise be a chair. Yes, Your Grace. And you will do it in the gray. I have only the gray. Then it answers. Augusta studied her a moment, the cameo rising and falling on the old breast. Something in the girl's stillness had begun, this last week, to trouble her, the way a picture hung a hair off true will, trouble a tidy room. She could not name it. She put it down to insolence and looked forward to being rid of her. The evening came in hard and clear, the snow gone blue under a full moon, the drive lined with the lamps of arriving carriages. Aurelia moved through the drawing room, lighting the last of the candles while the house filled behind her. She wore the dove gray, the high collar, the black velvet at her throat. She had dressed the way a soldier cleans a musket before a march he does not expect to win, from habit and for dignity, because the hands must have something honest to do. She did not look for Julian in the crowd. Looking for him was the one indulgence she had forbidden herself, and she kept the rule the way she kept all her rules, which was completely. He found her anyway, once, across the room. He was penned between Augusta and Seraphina's mother, a glass in his hand he was not drinking, and his eyes came to the gray figure by the candles and held there half a breath too long. Then he turned them deliberately to the pianoforte, as a man turns from a window he has been warned not to open. She read the whole of it, not yet. The turn of his head said, "Soon. Endure." She could endure. She had endured this exact room 100 times without a single ally in it. To endure it now, with one, was almost a luxury. The music began. The Miss Ossory sang a duet, tolerably. The rector's wife played something German and severe. Then Seraphina Vane went to the instrument in a rustle of emerald silk, and the room composed itself to worship, and Aurelia took her place at the corner of the pianoforte to turn the pages. Seraphina played well. That was the cruelty of her. She played with a cold accuracy that never missed and never moved, brilliance without a heart in it, and the room, which could not tell the difference, adored her for the brilliance. Aurelia stood at her shoulder and turned the leaves at the right instants and was, for a quarter of an hour, precisely the chair she had been told to be. Then, between two movements, in the little hush while she was still resolving a chord, Seraphina spoke. Not low, pitched rather to reach the first 3 rows. "You turn very prettily," she said, not looking up from the keys. "One would almost think you had been taught. Where does a lady's companion learn to sit so straight?" "Bath, my lady." Aurelia's hand was already on the next leaf. "One learns to be useful." "Bath." Seraphina let a run of notes fall like coins. "I have cousins in Bath. The Selwyn Agency, was it not? Off Milsom Street. My aunt took a girl from there." The next page turned under Aurelia's fingers without a tremor. But she felt the trap now, felt it the way one feels a floor go soft. And she understood in a single lit second that this was not idle. Seraphina's green eyes came up at last, sidelong, feline, pleased, and Aurelia knew that someone had spent money to fill them. She had one heartbeat to decide, and she used it. She stepped back from the pianoforte and dropped a small, correct curtsy, as if the piece were finished and her office done, and made to withdraw toward the tea things at the wall. "Stay," said Seraphina sweetly, and stood up from the keys herself, so that the abandoned instrument left a silence in the whole room for her voice to fill. "Stay, Miss Ashe, is it? I should so like the company to meet you properly. It is such a very affecting story." Heads turned. Aurelia stopped. To run now was to be chased, and she would not be chased across a drawing room. She turned back, folded her gloved hands, and stood. "There is no story, my lady. I pour the tea." "Oh, but there is." Seraphina drifted a step into the room's center, drawing the eyes with her as the moon draws water. At the edge of the crowd, Sir Rowland Hargrave had set down his glass and come forward a pace, his red face bland, his small eyes bright, and Aurelia saw the two of them find each other across the carpet like players who have rehearsed their marks. "Sir Rowland was telling me only this afternoon. He has a wonderful memory for faces, haven't you, Sir Rowland?" "I have been blessed with it," Hargrave said comfortably. "A curse in a card room, a gift elsewhere." "Tell them," Seraphina said, "what you told me." Augusta had risen. "Seraphina, my dear, the Miss Ossories were to give us the Italian air." "In a moment, Your Grace. This is far better than an air." Seraphina had never once raised her voice. She did not need to. 30 people had gone quiet to hear her, and a quiet room is the loudest instrument there is. "Sir Rowland?" Hargrave turned to the company with the ease of a man proposing a toast. "It is a small thing," he said, "and I would not raise it, save that Her Grace's hospitality has been so generous." and one does not like to see generosity imposed upon. He let his eyes travel to Aurelia and rest there, and his oiled smile widened by a hair. This young person calls herself Rowan Ash of Bath. I do not doubt she has papers to that effect. Papers are cheap. But I knew a family in the West, a baronet's family, some years since. A bad business. A very bad business. Defalcation. Disgrace. The man dead of it inside the year. Fenwick, the name was. Sir Henry Fenwick, of Marrowby. He paused, tasting the room's attention. There was a daughter. She vanished when the estate went under the hammer. A girl of 19 or so, and this is the particular thing. The girl had the oddest eyes. One heard of them even at a distance. Gray, they said, or violet, and the left one flecked through with gold, as though someone had dropped a grain of it in. A thing one does not forget. His small eyes came up to Aurelia's face and fixed on the left one. A thing one does not forget, he said again, softly, even under a false name, in a gray dress, pouring another woman's tea. The room drew its breath as one animal, and Aurelia stood in the center of it and felt the floor she had walked for 3 years simply cease to exist beneath her feet. She had known he might. She had told herself in the cold of her room exactly this, that he had money and a memory and a reason, and that one day the two would meet, knowing it did nothing. Nothing at all was the same as being looked at by 30 faces that had, a moment before, seen a chair, and now saw a fraud, a felon's brat, a thief in service, a story. She did not swoon, she did not weep. She had used all her tears 3 years ago and found them useless and had banked what was left. Well, said Seraphina, delighted. Have you nothing to say? It would be so easy to deny. Say you are Rowan Ash of Bath, and we shall all beg your pardon and hear the Italian air. Across the room, Julian had gone very still. Aurelia felt rather than saw it, the one point of stillness in a room turning toward her like iron filings. She did not look at him. To look at him now was to hang him beside her, to spend in one glance the thing he and she had been building through a month of silence, and she would not do it. Whatever this cost her, it would not cost him the case. She had built the case herself, in a cold room, on stolen paper. She would not throw it into a drawing room to be trampled for the sake of one instant's rescue. So she did the hardest thing she had ever done, which was to hold her tongue and let the lie of her denial go unspoken, because to deny it was to give Hargrave the pleasure of catching her in a second lie, and to affirm it was to end everything before its hour. She said, instead, to Seraphina, and not to Hargrave, and clearly enough for the last row, I think, my lady, you play very well. It is a pity you had to stop. Someone near the window laughed, once, in shock. Seraphina's smile flickered. You are impertinent. I am dismissed, I expect, said Aurelia. One does not need to be both. She turned to the head of the room, where the old woman stood gripping the ivory cane, and she made her a curtsy, and it was not the bob of a servant. It was the full, slow, articulate curtsy of a lady, spine straight, head level, the curtsy she had been taught at 8 years old in a house that was now a canal company's balance sheet, and every soul in the room saw the difference and understood it, and the understanding was worse than any confession. Your Grace, thank you for the situation. I am sorry to have deceived you as to my name. Augusta's face had gone the color of the tallow. Whatever she had suspected this last week, whatever half-formed wrongness in the picture, it resolved now into a thing she could not forgive, because it had been practiced under her own roof, at her own hearth, and she had read sermons to it. The cane came down once on the floor, hard. You will leave my house. Yes, Your Grace. Tonight. The word went through the room. Even Hargrave blinked. Even Seraphina, who had wanted a scene, had perhaps not wanted quite this one. A girl put out of doors into the snow at 9 o'clock, with the drifts still shoulder-high in the lanes. The rector's wife made a small sound of protest and thought better of it. Mother, Julian's voice. It fell into the room flat and level, and every head turned to him, and Aurelia's heart closed like a fist, because she heard in that single word the whole precipice, heard him about to throw away a month of silence, the case, the roads Whitcomb was still walking in London, all of it, to keep her out of the cold. She turned to him at last. She had sworn not to, and she did it anyway. One look, and she put into it everything she could not say aloud. Not for me, not now, not like this. You gave your word. The word tonight is silence. Whether he read it, or whether he had already, in that half-second, done the same arithmetic and hated the sum, she never afterward knew. His jaw set. The hard line of his mouth, that she had watched relax across a month of stolen pages, went to stone. "It is late," he said, "and the lanes are bad. Whatever the young woman is, she is a woman, and Corbridge does not turn a woman into a drift at night. She may have the gig to Shrewsbury in the morning." It was beautifully done. It sounded like a duke's cold decency and nothing more. A man too proud to have even a fraud freeze on his land. And the room, hunting for scandal in it, found none. Only Aurelia knew what it had cost, and only she saw the hand at his side, out of sight of the company against the dark cloth of his coat, close slowly into a fist, and stay closed. But Augusta was past managing, and she was still, whatever else, the mistress of the house. "She will not sleep another night under this roof," the old woman said, "and I will hear no more of it from anyone." Her gray eyes swung to Julian, and there was in them a flat, frightened suspicion she was too proud to speak, and it decided her further. "Tonight, Pardoe," her box to the door. "Yes, your grace." And that, Aurelia understood, was the end of it. She looked once more around the room, at the girandoles she had lit an hour ago, at the abandoned pianoforte, at Hargrave's oiled and finished smile, at Seraphina turning already to her mother, with the bright indifference of a cat that has knocked the cup from the table and lost interest in the fall. She looked last, and briefest, at Julian, and gave him nothing, because to give him anything was to give the room a thread to pull. Then she gathered the gray skirt in one gloved hand and walked out of the long drawing-room with her chin level and her step unhurried, and the whole company parted to let her pass and closed again behind her like water, and she did not once look back, and not one of them saw her hands shake, because she had put them under her shawl where hands are private. In the cold of the servants' passage, the shaking came up through her whole body at once, and she let it, leaning a moment against the wall where she had leaned the first night. 3 years of it, and a month of it, and 1 hour of it, all arriving in the muscles together. Then it passed. It always passed. She had learned that too. Mrs. Pardoe brought the box, and a candle, and a face full of things she did not say. "You'll not go tonight," the housekeeper whispered, glancing back down the passage. "It's madness. Bide till light. I'll speak to cook. There's the boot-room fire. If I stay till light, she will only have the pleasure of putting me out in daylight," Aurelia said, "with the maids to watch. I would rather choose the hour myself." She was already unpinning the borrowed cap, folding it, setting it on the box for the next girl. "It is my one choice left, Mrs. Pardoe. Let me have it." The box was small. It had always been small. A change of linen, the second gray, a comb, the letter and the record folded together and pinned inside her bodice, where they had lived for 3 years and would go on living against her heart into the snow. She put on the wool shawl and over it the thin cloak that was all she owned, and it would not be enough, and she knew it would not be enough, and she tied the black velvet a half-inch tighter at her throat, the way another woman might have said a prayer. At the low door to the kitchen yard she stopped, because a step had come behind her in the dark. It was not Pardoe. Julian stood in the passage without a candle, having come the servant's way, having left 30 people and his mother and the whole performance behind him for 90 seconds he could not afford, and his face in the dark was not a duke's face at all. "You are not walking to Shrewsbury tonight," he said, low and fast. "I forbid it. There is a widow, Mrs. Headley, at the lodge. She is ours. She is safe. You will go to her. You will wait. And in 3 days when Whitcomb—" "No," she said it gently, which was worse than sharply. "Your Grace, listen to me, for we have almost no time. If I go to your lodge tonight, someone sees, and by morning it is known that the Duke of Corbridge hid the Fenwick girl under his mother's nose, and then you are not a magistrate bringing a case, you are a man who kept a woman. Then the ledgers do not matter. Then the forgery does not matter. Then it is only a scandal, and the scandal is ours, and he—" She did not say the name. The passage had ears. "He walks away clean. You know this. You knew it a month ago. Nothing has changed but that it hurts now." His fist was at his side again. "I gave you my word I would not let you carry it alone to the end. And you have not." She looked up at him and let him, for 1 second, all the way in. "I have not been alone since the barn. Do you understand me? 3 years I stood in that room with no one on earth who knew my name, and this month I have not been alone once, And that is worth the snow. Let me keep it worth the snow. Do the thing we planned. Be dull. Let him win tonight. Let him be so certain he grows careless. And when your man comes back from London," her voice dropped to almost nothing, "you will know where to find me, because I will send you word by the only hand we can trust. Now let me go before someone comes looking for the host." For a long moment he did not move, and she thought he would refuse, and she prepared, if he did, to walk past him into the yard, because she had learned to walk past everything. Then he stepped back. It was the hardest thing she had ever watched a proud man do, and he did it for her, and she understood that his stepping back was the truest thing he had ever given her. Truer than the gig, truer than a rescue would have been. He reached into his coat and pressed something into her gloved hand, folding her fingers over it. Coin, more than she had held in 3 years, and beneath the coin the hard edge of the gold signet ring, off his own finger. "Not to spend," he said of the ring. "To show, to Mrs. Headley at the lodge, and to no one else, and only if you are desperate, and she will know it and take you in and hold her tongue. I am not asking you to use it. I am asking you to carry it, so that I know you have one door in the world that opens." His voice roughened. "Give a proud man that much." She closed her hand on it. She could not refuse him the ring without refusing him everything, and she was not, in the end, made of stone all the way through. 3 days, she said. 3 days. You will not come after me. I will not come after you. Every word of it cost him a tooth. God help me. She lifted the latch. The cold came in like a blade laid flat against the whole body. Beyond the door, the yard lay blue and silent under the enormous moon, the drifts carved and shadowed, the lane beyond a pale channel between white walls, and it was very beautiful, and it would very possibly kill her, and she stepped out into it because it was hers to step into, and no one else's to give or withhold. The snow took her to the knee at the first stride past the shelter of the wall. She freed her skirt, set her face to the pale lane, and began to walk. Behind her, the great house blazed with its 30 windows and its music starting up again. She heard, faint and obscene across the snow, the pianoforte resume, Serafina taking up the interrupted air, as though a girl had not just been turned into the dark between the movements, and ahead of her lay 4 miles of moonlit ice, and a widow's lodge she was not certain she could reach. She did not look back at the windows. Looking back was the one indulgence she had forbidden herself years ago, and she kept the rule now, the way she kept all her rules, which was completely. She fixed her eyes on the black line of the hedge where the lane bent out of sight, and she put one foot in front of the other in the deep cold. The letter and the record and the ring pressed hard against her heart, and she counted her steps the way her father had once taught her to count them up a long, dark stair, not to the top, which frightens, but only ever to the next, and the moon went with her, and the house fell away behind, and somewhere in the blazing rooms she had left a duke stood among his guests with an empty fist and a stone mouth, buying her the snow with his silence, and neither of them knew yet whether the price would be paid back or only paid. At the bend in the lane, the wind rose off the white fields and found the gap between shawl and throat, and the cold went all the way in, and she stopped for one breath with her hand against the frozen hedge to steady herself. Then, from far down the pale channel of the lane ahead, where no house should be, where the widow's lodge lay still a mile and more away, a light moved, small, yellow, swinging low, the way a lantern swings in a walking hand, coming toward her through the snow. The light did not hurry. It came the way she herself had once come to a stranger dying above a ford, low, steady, a hand that knew the ground under snow. Aurelia stopped in the middle of the lane and let it close the distance. Running would cost her the breath she needed. She set the box down at her feet and waited, one hand on the frozen hedge. "Miss Fenwick?" Not Ash. The voice was small and precise, and short of wind. A round man, bald beneath his hat, spectacles fogged white, a leather case clutched to his chest like a child rescued from a fire. "Whitcomb's solicitor. I stopped at the lodge. Mrs. Headley said you had walked out into this." She stood her ground. "You have 2 of my names, sir. I have none of yours that I have cause to trust. The Duke sent me 3 weeks past to London." He lifted the case an inch. "I came a week early. A man does not sit by a fire on what I am carrying." She looked at the case, and then at his ink-stained fingers gripping it, and something in her chest that had been braced for a month eased half an inch. She picked up her box. Then you had better carry it indoors, before we both freeze into the record. The lodge was small and warm, and smelled of tallow and apples. Mrs. Headley, a wide, quiet woman in widow's grey, set bread and hot milk before them, and asked no questions, which told Aurelia more about whose people these were than any letter could. Whitcomb laid the case on the deal table and opened it, and by the light of one candle he set the bottom of 3 years in front of her. The canal book first, a subscription list in a fair clerk's hand, the western cut of the year 11, and against the largest parcel a name. Marrowby was bought at your father's auction, Whitcomb said, by one Josiah Meade, a land agent's clerk with £40 to his name and no more use for 400 acres than a cat has for a fiddle. He held it 11 months. Then he sold it to the canal company for a sum I will not say aloud in a lady's hearing, and within the season he was dead of a fever and buried at Hargrave's charge in Hargrave's own churchyard at Cleobury. Aurelia's hand went still on the cup. I saw that burying, she said quietly. I was 19. I had gone to Cleobury to beg the clergyman for my father's letters. I saw Sir Rowland stand at the head of a pauper's grave in the rain, and I saw his face, and it was not grief. She turned the cup a half turn. I did not know then what the grave meant. I only knew that a man who smiles at a burying has buried something more than a clerk. Mrs. Headley, at the hearth, set down the poker without a sound, and stood very still, as country people stand when a thing spoken of in whispers for years is at last said plain at their own table. He buried the only mouth that could have named him. Whitcomb drew out the comparison sheet, the disputed transfer beside 3 true ones. And here is the hand that started it, the loop of the H. On the true page the pen runs on. On this one it lifts. The name was drawn, slowly, by a man watching a copy. Your father signed nothing. £1,100 was the knife, the estate was the throat, the canal was the price. She looked a long time at her father's true signature running free across the page, and at the forged one crouched beside it, and she did not weep. She had done her weeping in a cold room years before. What moved in her now was steadier than grief and older. He financed the daughter too, Whitcomb added, gentler. The Vane settlement, the 40,000 of Lady Seraphina's debt is Sir Rowland's money. He would have sat at the Duke's table by right of a marriage he purchased, and moved his sums through the one door in the county that no magistrate dares knock upon, a Duke's. He took off the fogged spectacles and rubbed them on his cuff. It is a tidy thing. A man builds a wall of law, brick by brick, and forgets that a wall is only as sound as the day someone brings a lamp to the mortar. And you have brought the lamp. Half of it. He looked at her over the bare rims. You have the other half, Miss Fenwick. Against your heart, if the Duke told me true, a record in your own hand, and your father's letter. The forgery proves the fraud. It does not prove the forger. Your testimony, and the date, and the wine, and the words you heard him speak, that is the mortar that fails him. He hesitated. You are not a witness we are protecting. You are the case. She was quiet. Then she reached to the neck of her dress and drew out the packet she had carried for 3 years, the letter, and the folded record, and beneath them, warm from her body, the Duke's gold signet on its cord. She laid all 3 on the table between the candle and the canal book. Then let us finish building the wall, she said, and see who is standing inside it when it falls. The great ball came 3 weeks after the thaw, on a hard, bright evening when the ice let go of the lanes at last, and the county could travel. 100 candles, Augusta had said, and there were 100 and more. Corbridge Hall, that had starved a companion's grate, now blazed at every window as though the house meant to be seen from Shrewsbury. Carriages stood 4 deep in the sweep. The long gallery had been opened, the chandeliers let down and dressed and hauled up again full of flame, and beneath them the whole of the county's consequence turned and bowed and appraised one another under a ceiling painted with indifferent gods. Sir Rowland Hargrave stood near the head of the room in a coat too heavy with braid, a fresh ring on a fat finger, and told a magistrate beside him that the Fenwick affair had been a sad, plain business, a baronet undone by his own pen. He believed the marriage as good as signed. He believed the only person alive who could name him had gone out into the snow a month since without a character, and that women who go out into snow without a character are not heard from again. Lady Seraphina Vane held court by the pianoforte in vibrant emerald, her family stones at her throat, and let the young men admire the settlement as much as the woman. Augusta sat in half-mourning silk beneath the largest chandelier, ivory cane across her knees, and surveyed her rooms with the cold satisfaction of a general the morning after a field is won. Then the doors at the gallery's far end opened, and Julian came through them, and he was not alone. He had dressed like a man going to a reckoning, charcoal and bottle green, the white cravat exact, and on his right hand, back in its place, the gold signet. On his arm walked a woman in deep sapphire silk. The gown was elegant and discreet at once, cut to be looked at and to refuse to be leered at. Pearls threaded her dark honey hair. Her chin was level and her step unhurried, the walk of a woman who had crossed a snowfield alone and had no further use for fear. At her throat, against all that silk and all those pearls, she wore a plain band of black velvet ribbon. The room did not know her at first. Then, one face at a time, it did. The music thinned and stopped as though a hand had closed the pianoforte. 100 candles went on burning into a silence you could have set a glass on. Julian walked her the length of the gallery. He did not lower his voice. He had spent a month lowering his voice, and he was finished. "Mother," he said, halting before Augusta, "you will remember Miss Ashe." Augusta's hand tightened white on the ivory cane. "I remember dismissing a servant who lied under my roof." "You dismissed no servant," his voice carried to the walls. "You dismissed Lady Aurelia Fenwick of Marrowby, daughter of Sir Henry Fenwick, Baronet, a man of 400 years' honest name, buried under a lie." He turned, not to his mother now but to the room, to the 100 faces and the magistrates among them. "And I will tell this company something I have kept a month behind my teeth, because a word too soon would have cost this lady her safety." He looked down at Aurelia, and the hard line of his mouth that scarcely anyone had seen relaxed. 3 years ago my carriage went over above the Dover ford on a night of rain. My coachman ran. I was bleeding to death in a ditch when a girl came down the bank with a lantern, cut her own petticoat for a bandage, and dragged a stranger twice her weight into a barn, and kept him alive till morning. She was gone before I woke. I did not have her name. I have looked for her through 3 years and 4 counties. His hand closed over Aurelia's on his arm. I found her here, pouring my mother's tea, told to be a chair. Somewhere a fan stopped moving. Hargrave had begun, very quietly, to move toward the far doors. "Sir Rowland." Julian did not raise his voice, and it stopped Hargrave more surely than a shout. "Stay. This concerns you most of all, Mr. Whitcomb." Whitcomb came out of the crowd with the leather case, set it on the long table beneath the chandelier, and opened it with ink-stained hands that did not shake at all. "The transfer that ruined Sir Henry Fenwick." He laid the sheet where the candlelight fell on it, and the nearest magistrate leaned in despite himself. 3 true signatures, one drawn slowly by a hand, copying them. "The loop of the H lifts, gentlemen. A forgery, and forgery has a purpose, and costs a purse, and both were spent to put 400 acres of Marrowby to auction cheap. The canal book, next, bought at that auction by a clerk with £40, sold 11 months later to the Western Canal for tens of thousands. The clerk buried within the year at the charge of the man who profited." He looked up over the bare rims. "The subscription list is in the company's own hand. The guarantor of the Vane settlement is in the settlement's own hand. Both hands are one hand. It is the hand of Sir Rowland Hargrave." The room made a sound like wind entering a house. Fans came down. Old Colonel Pruitt set his glass on a passing tray without looking at it. The magistrate nearest the table, who an hour before had laughed at one of Hargrave's stories, drew back his hand from the man's sleeve as though the braid had grown hot. Along the walls the county's mothers leaned to one another, and the leaning carried a name down the length of the gallery in a hiss too quiet to punish and too loud to stop. Whitcomb let the silence do his arguing for him. And then Aurelia stepped forward and laid her own 2 papers on the table beside Whitcomb's. The record in her own hand, the dates, the wine sent ahead of the man, the 6 words she had carried 3 years. "I made certain of that." And beneath it, unfolded now for the first time before witnesses, her father's letter, the ink soft with handling. "My Aurelia, I have done nothing that you need be ashamed to own." "I heard him say those words in this house," she said, and her voice was low and it did not waver. "In that chair, over that fire, when he believed the only ears in the room belonged to a servant. I wrote them down that night. I have written down everything since." She lifted her eyes, the violet eyes, the left one flecked with gold, the eyes a duke had hunted through 4 counties, and set them full on Hargrave. "You told this county my father died of shame. He died of you." Hargrave's red face had gone the color of tallow. He turned to the magistrates with the old oil rising in him. This is a disinherited woman's spite, dressed up by a duke who fancies her. Where is your proof a clerk did not buy honestly, that a fever is not a fever?" The clerk's name was Josiah Meade. Whitcomb's small voice cut clean through it. "I have his burial, his purchase, and the deposition of the sexton at Cleobury, who was paid to dig quiet, and has grown tired of being poor. He waits in the steward's room, Sir Rowland. Shall I send for him?" Hargrave's small, calculating eyes went round the ring of faces for one friend, and found emerald backs and turned shoulders. He wet his lips. "Your Grace," he tried, low and oiled, swinging toward Julian as a drowning man swings toward a rope. "Surely a matter of business between gentlemen need not be aired so before ladies." "You buried a gentleman to keep it from being aired," Julian said. "You do not get to name the company now." Hargrave said nothing. It was the first honest silence of his life. The senior magistrate, a lean old man named Pruitt, who had eaten Hargrave's dinners and drunk his wine, and now looked at him as at a stain on his own sleeve, stepped to the table and turned the comparison sheet to the light with one finger, and looked at the lifted loop of the H for a long moment. "Sir Rowland," he said at last, and his voice was very tired and very level, "you will consider yourself in my charge. There will be an examination at the assizes, and I think, on this, an indictment. Forgery, fraud, and we shall see what the sexton makes of the fever." He looked at the braided coat, the too many rings. "You may put down whatever you are about to say. It will keep for the bench." 2 of the county men closed in on either side of Hargrave without being asked, the way men do when the wind has plainly changed. He was not dragged. He was simply, quietly, walked from the room that had been his, to command an hour before, past 100 faces that had bowed to him and now turned away as one, and the last thing the gallery saw of Sir Rowland Hargrave was the braid on his back going out through the doors he had tried to reach too late. Into the ringing quiet, Lady Seraphina rose from beside the pianoforte, emerald and stone, and found that the settlement she had come to display was rubble, and that 40,000 pounds of debt had just been named aloud in front of every family whose son might have covered it. She was clever enough to read a room. She gathered her mother and her fan and left before the pity could reach her, and no one stopped her, and that was its own kind of sentence. Augusta had not moved. The ivory cane stood upright under her folded hands, and her gray eyes had gone from her son to the woman in sapphire and back, and something in the old rigid face was working that had not worked in years. "You knew," she said to Julian. "You let me keep him at my table." "I let you keep him 1 month longer than I could stomach," Julian said, "so that he would be here tonight, and confident, and within reach of the law, instead of warned and gone to the continent with a duke's silence to hide behind. I am sorry for the month, mother. I am not sorry for the reckoning." Augusta was quiet. Then she rose, cane and all, to her full straight height, and turned to the room, and if there was one thing the Dowager Duchess of Corbridge understood in her marrow, it was how to own the ground she stood on. "It seems," she said, in a voice dry as old paper and carrying to every corner, "that I have been made a fool of in my own house by a very great scoundrel, and set right in it by a companion I told to be a chair." Her thin mouth pressed. "I withdraw my countenance from Sir Rowland Hargrave, and from every arrangement his money touched. Entirely. Before witnesses." She looked at Aurelia a long moment and inclined her white head the smallest fraction. "From a duchess, an abdication. Lady Aurelia, you read Cowper better than any woman I have had in this house. I begin to see I never once listened." It was not an apology. From Augusta, it was nearer than any living soul had come to one, and Aurelia met it with the slow, full curtsy of a baronet's daughter, given now for the first time as herself. Julian was not finished, and the county knew it, and stayed. He raised his voice one last time. "Marrowby was sold 3 times over on a lie. I have this night instructed Mr. Whitcomb to unwind every deed the fraud rests upon, and to restore the estate and the name of Fenwick to its rightful holder, whatever it costs, and to see it entered on the county rolls that Sir Henry Fenwick died innocent of a single charge laid against him. He turned from the room to the woman beside him, and his voice came down out of the rafters to something meant for her, that all the same the whole gallery heard. And as for the heir of Corbridge, and whom he shall marry, my cousin may go on hoping. He will hope a long while, a breath. I told you at the barn I do not give my word to servants. I have not given it since to any woman. I give it to you now, in front of all of them, or not at all. Aurelia looked up at him. For 3 years she had schooled her face to give nothing away, and she let the schooling go. You gave me your ring in the snow, she said, and told me it was a door in the world that would open. I carried it a month against my heart. She lifted the cord from her neck, the gold signet swinging on it, and held it out to him on her open palm. I am not a transaction, Julian. I will not be married to mend an estate, nor bought as Seraphina was bought. I know precisely what you are worth, he said, and no estate in England could stand the price. He did not take the ring back. He closed her fingers over it with both his hands. Keep the door. I only ask leave to stand on the other side of it. You once told me you do not command a witness, she said, and the corner of her mouth moved for the first time that night. You cannot command this answer either. I am not commanding. He bent his dark head, the gray thread at his temple catching the candlelight. For 3 years I have been trying to pay a debt to the woman who kept me alive. I understand tonight that I chose the word wrongly. It was never a debt. Let me spend the rest of it finding the right word. Behind them, the musicians, uncertain, had gathered again at their places. Someone, greatly daring, drew a first long note from a violin. They are waiting for their host to open the dancing, Julian said. I have kept this house waiting a month. Will you make it a little longer, or will you dance? She looked once around the blazing gallery, at the table with its damning papers, at the doors Hargrave had gone out of, at Augusta straight and thawing under her chandelier, at the 100 faces that had learned her name in a single hour and would carry it to every drawing-room in the county by morning. Then she put her gloved hand in his. He led her to the center of the floor beneath the largest of the lights, and the county fell back to make a ring. For a breath no one else moved. The same faces that had watched her walk out into the snow now watched her take the floor, and could not for their lives have said which sight shamed them more. Then the violins found the waltz, and the Duke of Corbridge danced with Lady Aurelia Fenwick where every soul in Shropshire could see. His hand was steady at her back over the sapphire silk, her chin was level. At her throat, plain against the pearls, the black velvet ribbon that had been her mother's, the last thing her mother owned, worn through 3 years of gray, turned under the candlelight with every turn of the dance. You are still wearing it, he murmured, close. It came in on a servant, she said. It stays on a Fenwick. My mother would want to have seen this. She is seen, he said. You are all of you seen now. There is no one left in this room who does not know your name. And that, she thought, turning under the 100 candles with her hand warm in his, was the whole of it. She had come to Corbridge in a dove-gray gown and asked only to be furniture, because for 3 years the single thing she could not afford was to be looked at. She had feared being seen more than she had feared the cold or the hunger or the man by the fire. Now the fire was hers, and the man by it was gone to the assizes, and the whole bright county turned around a woman it could not stop watching, and she did not lower her eyes. The gray dress was folded away in a box in a widow's lodge, and it could stay there. You were the only one, she told him quietly, as the waltz turned them past the chandelier. Whoever truly saw me, while I was still nothing but a chair in the corner. You were never the chair, Julian said. I only had the sense to look at the woman holding the cup. Long ago, in a cold room by a starved grate, a dying man had written to his daughter that she had nothing to be ashamed to own. She had believed him through 3 winters when no one else in England would. Tonight the county rolls would be corrected, and a scoundrel would sleep in a magistrate's keeping, and a duke's hand would rest at the small of her back before the whole of the ton. But the letter had been true from the first line, and it was only the world, at last, that had been made to read it. She had walked into Corbridge unseen, by her own choosing, in gray. She waltzed out of that choosing in sapphire and pearls, and her mother's black ribbon, named at last in her father's true name, and being seen, she understood now, turning and turning in the light, was the one thing she had never once been willing to beg for, and the only thing she had ever truly wanted to be given. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever, like Aurelia in her plain dove gray, kept your true name folded against your heart, while a room decided you were worth nothing? Is there a wrong done to you or your family that was never set right, the way Sir Henry Fenwick's ruin was forged and left to stand? And do you believe the person who sees you when no one else will is worth waiting for, even across 3 winters of silence? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about restored dignity, justice long delayed, and true love that arrives against all odds, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel